the clarity, the awareness, the energy, the focus, and just being more present and taking in like everyday moments for me is probably been the highlight. It's not really about all the things that I've done. It's about me feeling a lot more calm, a lot more authentic, a lot internally, and really just feeling that joy, genuine joy is something that I don't think I had.
Hey y'all, what's going on? Welcome back to the Stacking Days podcast, where we highlight underrepresented journeys of sobriety and recovery from within Black and Brown communities. I'm your host, Ray Donovan, as always, and really looking forward to the conversation today. It's a little bit of a role reversal in that I've actually appeared on my guest's podcast. So it's always fun to put the interviewer in the interviewee's seat. With that being said, I want to invite Dupe to the show. Dupe, welcome to Stacking Days.
Thank you, Ray. It's lovely to be here. How are you?
I'm doing well. I've been watching you and following you for such some time now, actually, and just recently, just seeing all of the fantastic things that you're doing, just in the broader space of wellness, but more specifically in sobriety and recovery. And I was like, you know what, I got to get Dupe on here. It's been way too long between the time that she and I had an opportunity to chat last on the Thrive Alcohol Free podcast. So let me get her on Stacking Days. Let's have a conversation about what she's up to these days and what her path has been to where she's come.
Oh, bless you. Well, thank you. Yeah, it's great to be here. And I've been watching you as well, and I'm loving all your podcasts and what you're doing in this space. So thank you for everything you do.
Thank you so much for that. I mean, I appreciate it. I think we're all in good company. I mean, I feel like, several years ago, it was really hard to come by any type of platform that highlighted folks of color, and certainly platforms that were hosted, run, led by folks of color, regardless of where you are geographically. So again, appreciate the work that you're doing. And, for those who may be, learning of Dupe for the first time, she's a multifaceted woman. She's a CEO. She's a published author, an entrepreneur. She's a podcast host, a coach. She wears a lot of hats. So we're going to see where this conversation goes. But the impetus of it all is really rooted in alcohol and moving away from that substance and having some of a habitual grip on her life. So Dupe, let's start there. Let's go back to the beginning of your relationship with alcohol. We'll kind of just take the audience through it chronologically from there.
Yeah, perfect. So I always start by saying there was no sort of rock bottom or road to Damascus story. So I'll start with that, because I always think there's a bit of a misconception sometimes that if you stop drinking, it's because you've had to, or because because there's been some sort of reason to. So yeah. I would have always classed myself as a normal drinker, and I say that, but what's normal? Right. So There's no judgment at all. I think we can all say what we think is normal, and actually you'll hear my story and you might think it's completely abnormal. But, either way, I started drinking like many people, probably at university at about the age of 18. So I went off to university. I think it's your first sort of gamut into being an adult and really being free, and away from parents, and just sort of like finding your way. And with everything around me, and I think we're very conditioned by society and by who we hang around with and everything else, but society says that as an adult, what you do is you drink. And when I went to university and was in this university, which was, an amazing university, but I remember getting there and just feeling like I need to fit in. I want to fit in. I want to make friends. I want to be cool. I want to, and yeah. I was in a hall of residence, and there are about 100. That's where we sort of start your first year. You stay in this hall, and then you go off and find houses and things. And in that first year, I just remember the way that I made friends was by going out and socializing, and that involved having a drink. And so all the new clubs and the new teams and things that I joined, it was all about, socializing and working hard, but playing hard as well.
Sure.
And there was a, and I think where it became quite ingrained in me, this whole alcohol is necessary or you need to drink or if you don't you're boring, is because there were 180 of us in that hall of residence, and I remember two girls who didn't drink, and those two girls, from what I remember, this is my memory of course, but I felt they were, and there were probably more people, but they were ostracized, no one talked to them, people felt sorry for them, no one really gave them the time of day, and I wasn't
Hmm.
going to be one of those people. And so
Yeah.
that was the start. And then I also spent a year in Spain. So my degree was in management studies with Spanish, which meant I had a year in Spain. And again, there's a whole wine culture, vineyards, learning about wine. And, you know, I think I left there thinking, right, well, I know a bit about wine now, and so I wasn't probably drinking wine prior to that, and then wine became something that I enjoyed drinking, and I also remember um, gin and tonics and the way they poured gin and tonics in Spain at the time. They probably still do. You have these fishbowl glasses, big glasses, and they just literally pour. There's no measurements. It's not like here in the UK where they literally measure how much you're pouring. They'll just pour, and it's only
Hmm.
if you say stop they
Oh,
actually
really?
stop. So you can find yourself with a big glass of pure gin and a little top up of tonic, and that
Wow.
was, that was the gin and tonics over there. And at the time, it was the peseta, it wasn't the euro. So a gin and tonic as a student was costing me 50p UK,
Really?
50 pence UKP, which is very little. And
Super
so,
reasonable.
yes, very reasonable. So that was, I would say, that's where my sort of drinking career started. And then I went into the city and worked in the city of London, and again, it was very much a work hard, play hard mentality. I was a management consultant for many years. And so that involved a lot of client work, global client works, which involved business travel, which involved client dinners, which involved networking, conferences. I used to speak at conferences, and all of that. Again, we worked really hard and
Hmm.
we'd work long hours, but then when we were celebrating sort of the end of a project or the end of a big sale or whatever we did, it was always team dues. They were always sort of drink infused, and so that was just what I knew, and I never really questioned it. I never thought anything about it. I enjoyed it.
Hmm.
There was nothing wrong with it as such. Obviously, I had my days where I probably felt like I drank far too much, and I woke up the next day feeling awful, and as you do. But that was just part and parcel of drinking,
Yeah.
and yeah.
I was gonna say, I mean, I feel like, university, for those who are fortunate enough to get to that level of education, oftentimes is where some of the, I guess, the gloves come off in terms of how much you're exposed to alcohol, right? I feel like when you're
Mm,
younger, if you're in high school, it's less so. And then when you're off on
mm,
your quote unquote own for the first time, often in university, you're trying to fit in, and you're not
yeah.
thinking about the detriments of potentially what alcohol could be for you.
Yeah, yeah. You just have
I
no
mean,
idea.
and if for some it's not a problem. It doesn't sound like it was an issue for you. You strike me as a pretty studious,
Mm,
person who probably did really well in college. I, on the other hand, ended up dropping out twice, and some of that I think was just due to my levels of motivation being diminished by probably a little bit too much indulgence and alcohol and what have you.
mm.
Um, what is your sense of like those two individuals who are ostracized? I feel like they must have been like extremely principled folks at that at that age to hold the line, and
Yeah.
jokes on the rest of us that you look
Mm,
back on in retrospect, even though they were ostracized, they probably like ended up on top by way of the decisions that they made.
absolutely. Hindsight's a great thing, isn't it? But at the time, they were very principled, and I think, if I remember correctly, they were. they were religious, they were Christian,
Mm.
and they were very much, we don't drink and we have our Christian friends, and it was, so that was their sort of thing. And so again, my in my mind was, well, if you don't drink, you're boring. If you don't drink, I had, it was very black and white. If you don't drink, you had a problem because you don't drink, or you're religious,
Hmm.
or there was some reason why that I didn't really trust. So I was always someone, when people said they didn't drink to me, I'd feel sorry for them. I'd think, well, you're missing out.
Right.
Surely, what do you do if you don't drink? I remember meeting someone, one of the mums, and it was very rare that I met a mum that didn't drink. And I remember thinking, well, why don't you drink? And I was really skeptical, and I didn't really want to get to know her very much because she didn't. And that's just, in hindsight, really ridiculous. But I think we're
Mm.
taught that alcohol is normal. It's what we do to celebrate, commiserate. It's just what you do as an adult. It's, if you're on a holiday, you have to drink. If it's a sunny day, if it's a rainy day, whatever excuse, it's just there. And the way it's marketed as well, I think a lot of people don't appreciate how much alcohol is marketed to us. It's the second biggest marketing spend after cars globally. So if you think about that, that's huge, right? And that's
Hmm.
why you see all the movies and the TV shows, and you walk around, and everyone, it's just there. It's always been there, and I think they did a really good job. And when I was younger as well, I remember it was all about, girl power. We had something called Ladettes here, which is all about keeping up with the boys in terms of drinking beer
Okay.
and keeping up with the boys. There was obviously Sex in the City at the time. There were loads of things that really sort of glamorized alcohol and made you feel that if you didn't drink, there was something wrong with you, or that you weren't part of the crowd.
Yeah.
And actually, I think that's the same with so many things in society. And sometimes we have to question it. And I suppose with my coaching hat on, I that's something I help people do, because it's very much, you have all these beliefs about certain things, but you never really take the step back and say, is that really true? Is that something I have to do because everyone else is doing it? Is this something that's serving me? and
Yeah.
and I think we rarely make those, we rarely talk about those things or ask ourselves those questions.
Yeah.
And
I mean,
so, yeah.
no, I was just going to agree with you. I feel like so few folks um, have developed the muscle of self critique, right, and have
Mm,
gotten themselves to a place where they can start asking themselves some tough questions about how they're interacting with the world around them. And I think that it's not just about alcohol. The one thing that I have found, though, is that by making this decision around alcohol not to drink, it has worked that muscle so that I can be more critical about other aspects of life. So I totally feel you on that one.
yeah, it's so true. And I think this is the domino habit. If you can break this, and you can, you don't have to be drinking a huge amount at all. You could be drinking a lot, you could be drinking a little. If you think in some way life could be better without it, spiritually, mentally, physically, or emotionally, then take a break and see what happens. Because ultimately, once you're not drinking, then it's easier to exercise, then it's easier to make the right choices around food, then it's easier to think about how much sugar you're consuming, it's easier to think about, what can I do to better myself from a personal growth perspective. It's easier to do all those things because you have a lot more awareness, a lot more focus and clarity, and
Yep.
you've got so much more energy. I say it's a superpower, and it's probably the best kept secret, because all the elite performers, a lot of the celebrities that we don't think about don't drink, and
Yep.
actually that's probably their superpower.
Yeah, it certainly is something that propels you into another level of proficiency, and when you remove that from your life, I am curious, being that you've categorized yourself, as a former normal drinker. How did you
Mm.
get to a point where you decided that this is not something that I wanted a part of my life anymore? Because I'm assuming you're still at the, and I've listened to your story, but I wanted to wait until we got together to get into detail on it. But
Mm.
I'm assuming that you're still very much a part of the culture, right? But you at some point made a decision to say, I need to remove this from my life for all of the X reasons. So like what
Mm.
did that conversation look like?
Mm.
And at what point does a normal drinker arrive at to say, okay, let me take a break, let me look at this a little bit more critically and what potentially it could mean for me down the line?
Mm. And that's why I use the word. It's, normal is so overused.
Yeah,
Normal can be normal for anyone, and so my normal is not your
I drank
normal.
normal
Not
too
the
for me at
listeners.
the
Yeah,
time.
exactly. We're all normal, right? So, but I would say there were a couple of things that maybe got me starting to question it. So I went through in my late 20s. My brother passed away, unfortunately, from an illness, and I found myself drinking more at home as opposed to out, which I
Hmm.
hadn't really done. I used to only really drink when I was out. And so it was more, I began to use it as a coping mechanism in a way. And then that sort of went. But then I think that probably then increased my tolerance to alcohol,
Right.
because I think the more you drink, the more tolerant. It's an addictive substance, so you're going to increase your tolerance and everything else. And then fast forward a few years, I had my daughter, who's now 10, in my sort of 30s, early mid 30s, and and then I got into this whole mummy wine culture where, again, you're at home or you're going to people's houses for play dates or whatever, and you all have a glass of wine. And that, again, was the normal.
Right.
And so, again, mummy wine culture is something that's promulgated. You can't parent without wine. I mean, how could you possibly? You need wine to
Yeah.
cope as a parent. That's what we're all told. And so, again, I think you get sucked into this. Drinking is normal, it's a habit, it's something that you do. And it was really then towards my late 30s where I was drinking red wine and just thinking, these are my heavy red wines that I loved since I was, in my 20s in Spain. I just realized I couldn't drink a glass without getting a headache, without it really just not feeling very nice from a body perspective.
Hmm.
And now I know the impact of things like of alcohol with perimenopause, menopause, which is potentially another topic. Maybe not today, but I've done quite a few panels
Hmm.
and things on alcohol and perimenopause and menopause. But it just wasn't agreeing with me. So at that point, again, I didn't question it. I didn't say I can't drink. I mean, why would you not do that? So my go to was, well, okay, if I can't drink heavy red wines, I'll go on to the lighter red wines. Logical.
Yeah.
Then, and then it got to the point where I was drinking that, and again, I just felt like this is really making me feel pretty crap. And why am I
Hmm.
doing this to myself? But again, the thought of, I was very sociable. I think you get to be known as your identity is wrapped up in who you are, and drinking to an extent. People knew me as the champagne queen, probably because I enjoyed a glass of champagne, and that was probably that. By the end of it, that was the only thing I could probably drink. But
Right.
champagne was my sort of thing, and gin and tonic, they were the two things. But again, people get to know you. We used to host these fabulous dinners, and we'd always make sure people had as much as they wanted to drink. We had all the best wines and all of that sort of stuff. I felt I was a bit of a wine snob, wine connoisseur. So again, it's all wrapped up in your identity, and you don't appreciate it is. And so the thought of not drinking was never questioned. And and so then it got to the point again, I couldn't drink those lighter red wines. So I was like, okay, I've never really done it, but why don't I go into the white wines when I go out and have a drink of white wine? And it was
Yeah.
just, it was like I was justifying.
Yeah.
And they say alcohol's the only drug you have to justify not drinking. And for me, I was absolutely justifying the fact that surely there must be something I could drink that's going to keep me sociable, that's going to keep me fun, that's going to give me the confidence. I was used to, as I said, jumping on a plane, and I've traveled a lot for business. I've been very lucky. I've traveled a lot for business. I did 13 countries in 1 year. So I've traveled all over the world. And you get on a plane and they thrust glass of champagne in your hand. And so again, it's just a given that that's what you have to do. And so for me, it just got to the point where I was sat there thinking, why the hell do I keep doing this? But I couldn't, for whatever reason, stop.
Could I ask you a really quick question? So
Mhm.
when you get to a point where you start and when you start rationalizing and justifying
Mhm.
alcohol in your life, does
Mhm.
that now cause you, and maybe this is retrospective, but does that now cause you to relook of that at that categorization of like a normal relationship? Because I feel like
Mhm.
there's certainly some contention there with
Mhm.
how you view yourself in relation to the substance versus how it's actually coming through in your life.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And so that's why I said, normal to me is maybe not normal to other people. And I would say that it was definitely a habit. It was
Yeah.
definitely something that I felt was necessary for me to be the life and soul of the party, even if it was just I had to have a glass when I was out and about to sort of do that. It took the edge off me potentially at the beginning of the night having to socialize with people that I'd never met and network. And so it gave me that confidence, I suppose, or I thought it was giving me that confidence. And again, I think it had just become this habit that I wasn't questioning. And so it did get to the point where I just thought this isn't really serving me. And in 2020, March 2020, I managed to climb. We all know what happened then. But
Yep.
on the 5th of March, I summited Mount Kilimanjaro. And so I managed to do this amazing thing. And when you climb a mountain, it does change your life a little bit. But I literally say I climbed a mountain, came down, and the world changed. And it literally did. And
Yeah.
so I got, I remember doing this amazing thing and just being up there and thinking, gosh, there's so much more I could potentially do if I can climb this mountain and do this amazing live on a mountain for 6 days in a tent, which for me was just never something I was ever going to do. We did it for charity. It was fantastic. But the experience really showed me what I was capable of. And it made me think I wanted to do more. And life had become very much work and family. They were the two things in my life other than socializing.
Yeah.
That was pretty much. I mean, I liked exercise and I did all of that, but it was more that was just what you do. There was never really any thought around it, and it wasn't something that was massive in my, it wasn't a massive focus or anything like that. And anyway, I did this thing and I really felt like, gosh, there's more. I can do so much more. And in those 6 days, of course, I didn't drink anything. You don't drink on a mountain.
Yeah.
But then I came down, and the first thing I did was say, "Oh, we need a glass of champagne to celebrate," And you think this is just ridiculous. And so I think in the back of my head, I had this thing that I can do more. There's more to life. Maybe this is something that I don't really need in my life anymore. But again, I never had the chance to really delve into that because as soon as we got home, a week later we were in lockdown, and we all know
Yeah.
what happened. But an opportunity arose um, where I said I'll take a 21-day break from drinking. And so my church was doing an initiative at the time where they said give up something for 21 days. And I thought I'm going to not drink for 21 days, and that was started on the 9th of November 2020, and I did those 21 days. Few things happened in those 21 days which made me think, okay, I'll carry on. And then I thought, well, I'll get through my first Christmas and New Year. I'll carry on. And it's been 4 years. So, yeah, on the
Yeah.
9th of November this year, it was 4 years. And I'm heading into my fifth alcohol free Christmas and New Year, which is unbelievable. So, yeah, so that's sort of in a nutshell my story.
Hey guys, I hope you're enjoying the episode. If you are, we'd really love it if you could leave us a rating and a review on Apple Podcast or a rating on Spotify. And of course, please feel free to invite somebody into the conversation. If you feel like you have a story to share on the podcast, why not apply to be a guest? You can do so by completing the form on the podcast description or find it on stackingdays.com. That's stacknday's.com. But for now, let's jump back into the conversation.
I love it. I love it. Well, congratulations on 4 years plus. That's a huge accomplishment for anyone who's. I mean, because you're effectively just taking the driver's seat, right, on something in your life, and I think that's extremely respectable. I want to go back a little bit. I too at one point climbed Mount Kilimanjaro, and I think I took like a longer route. So I was on the mountain for 10 days all in.
Right.
And at the time when that happened, that was the longest string of time that I had gone without drinking. And I just remember thinking to myself, I mean, it's beautiful up there. Anyway, the whole thing was beautiful. And I probably wouldn't have been able to enjoy it the way that I did if I had been drinking on the mountain. I don't know how you could with the altitude, but again, similar to you, I came down, and as soon as I arrived back at the hotel, the first thing I did was crack open a bottle of Tanzanian beer, and and that was that. And and then several years later, I thought back fondly on those 10 days, primarily because they were this detoxification of myself, and yeah, I didn't come back into COVID. I can only imagine what that reentry looked like, but certainly it gives you an opportunity to start looking at your life a little bit differently. And so the question I have for you is, you're on Kilimanjaro in March. You don't start your 21-day challenge until November. What did that 9 months look like for you? I mean, there's probably this constant back and forth dialogue that got you to a place to say, this is a broad-based 21-day challenge that my church is putting out there. I'm going to decide that alcohol is what my relationship is what I'm going to lean into. What did that 9-month conversation look like to get you to a point to say, I'm going to take a break here?
Well, we all know it was a bit of a
certainly a mess.
It
was a mess. Yeah,
we all, it was.
This is an explicit podcast, by the way, Dupe. So if you want to go for it, go for it. But
I was just going to say, we all know it was a bit of a shit show, don't we? The whole COVID thing. So it was one of those. Again, I just remember thinking, well, what the hell? No one really knew what was going on. It was all a bit it was just weird, wasn't it? And I think, one, I had all the memes and the mummy WhatsApp group saying we deserve a drink, and people saying, can we have a drink now we've just done the homeschooling, and all of that sort of stuff. And so that was constantly in the background. It again felt like everyone was drinking to cope. And then from a personal perspective, I just found I was working a lot and I wasn't really looking after myself. But ironically, I was the people and purpose lead. I've done a lot of coaching and mentoring for many years prior to, as part of my corporate world before becoming an official coach. And I was the people and purpose lead for my team. And I was saying to my team for many months, you've got to look after yourselves. You've got to go for walks. You've got to get away from your screen. You've got to, eat well, all the things. But I suddenly thought, I'm not doing any of that. I'm working 7 till 7. I say we were not working from home. We were living at work. And, it was very much, it was just very intense. And then obviously you're all at home. You can only go out for a certain amount of time. And I wasn't, I'd go for a brief walk every now and then again, but I wasn't doing it's lunchtime, go get away from your screen. I was literally on Zooms or doing work or whatever. And I just got to the point, probably about September, October time, thinking, this isn't living. This isn't life. Because then at the end of the day, invariably I'd probably have a glass of wine to take the edge off and to be like, that's my reward for ending the day. And then you just got up and did it again. And as I said, having done such an amazing experience on Kilimanjaro, to then come back to this sort of mundanity of life and this restriction of life, it was really quite, I think I was thinking of it was probably in the back of my mind. And I think I then was beginning to realize that it had become a habit. Drinking was just something that I did. And I think I was beginning to question it. But at the same time, I didn't feel brave enough to do anything about it. And my I mean I should say I have tried to do dry Januaries and tried to do your Lents and things like that, but this time felt really different. It felt like I was actually going to do those 21 days, whereas before it really felt like I'll try it, but I know I'll only do a week, and that's what I did. I do that Monday to Thursday. I would get to Thursday and I would say, oh well, I've done so well, I've not drunk in the week, so I can surely have a drink on the weekend. I'll just have a glass on a Saturday. And then before you know it, you get to Monday and you're like, well, I've had a drink now, so why should I carry on?
Yeah.
Whereas I went into this time, probably with all the things in my head about wanting to do more, wanting more. But there were a couple of things that really stand out. One was I kept getting this sort of nudge or feeling that by stopping drinking, it was going to help me in some way. It was going to lead to something, to the point that the last thing that I really remember, it sounds weird, but hearing was the truth will set you free. And I had this real sense that by stopping drinking, the truth would set me free. I didn't know free from what. I didn't know. I was very much, if I look back, I had a good life. I've got a good family, good job, lots of friends, enjoying life. Obviously prior to COVID, we went on multiple holidays a year. We were living the good life. So there was no real reason for me to, the truth set me free. What does that mean? But that's something I really remember. And then the other thing was that on the final day, on the 8th of November, I thought, well, I'm not going to drink for 21 days. And I did have that feeling I was actually going to try and stick to it this time, that 21 days. And I thought, well, as a last hurrah, I might as well have a glass of champagne. And so I opened this bottle of champagne and thought, and now I look at that and think, what a waste. Why did I do that? Anyway, I poured a glass and literally had 2 sips. And my stomach started to churn. And I had this visceral sort of, this isn't good. I don't like it. This is really not settling on me anymore. And actually, there's something here that says, and maybe my body was just reacting to it negatively. It was something saying to me, you don't need this anymore. This is something you can take a break with. But at no point did I say, this is forever. I'm never going to drink after these 21 days. If you'd asked me 4.5 years ago, would I be advocating being alcohol free? Would I be speaking on stages? Will I have written a book? Will I have a podcast? I would have laughed and said, no way on earth. And I probably would have poured myself another glass of fizz and said, cheers. I'm not, just to make a point, because it was not on my radar. What has happened in the past 4 years was never my intention. It wasn't planned, which makes me feel like if you, the listener, are listening to this and thinking, I've got this nudge or this thought that keeps coming back to me that maybe not drinking could help in some way, take a break, because you'll be amazed at what could potentially happen.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think that, and you've probably spoken to a lot of folks where that break, whether it's 30 days, 21 days, 90 days, is just giving yourself an opportunity to see what the alternative can look like for you, right? I think is a huge step. I am curious, in your experience, it sounds as though it wasn't your break specifically through your church wasn't specifically geared towards alcohol, right? So what did those early days look like for you in just being able to maintain that 21 day and ultimately now 4.5 years, but that early 21 day break? Did you reach back into your church community? Were there folks near in, friends and family? Like what was your quote unquote program, that you subscribe to find some success in trying to identify, ultimately what set you free?
Yeah, it's a great question. No, not at all. I didn't tell anyone that I was doing it.
Well,
So it was, it was 21 days of, I didn't say to the church, I'm not drinking. I just, in my head, was like, right, that's my thing for 21 days. And obviously, each service they would pray about, people doing this 21 days and all the rest of it. But I didn't say to anyone I was doing that. So the only person that knew I wasn't drinking at that point was my husband. And he was really supportive. He was still drinking at the time. But the first couple of weeks were I'd say pretty boring, actually. I was drinking tea, coffee, water. That's all I remember.
Mm-hmm.
And I was going to bed fairly early and reading a book and just sort of, I'm going
Trying
to
to
do. It was
bide
more
the
like
time.
that willpower that, you just had, trying to get through it, as it were. You were going to say something, right?
No, I was saying you're just trying to bide the time. I feel like that's when you start realizing how much time is consumed by this, you seemingly like harmless activity. But then you realize, like, okay, what am I going to do now? And you're just kind of looking at the clock at the end of the day.
That's exactly it. That's exactly it. And so then you're in bed at like 7:38, 8 p.m.
Right. Yeah.
When my daughter went to bed, I'd go to bed. It was pretty much like that for the first couple of weeks. And I don't remember ever thinking it's boring or it's not something. It was just more, I'm going to do this. And so I'm going to keep going. But then I stumbled across a few things. So I must have, and to this day, I've got no idea how I found these things. I stumbled across a couple of TED Talks,
Mm-hmm.
and one of them was about grey area drinking. That whole concept I wasn't aware of. As I said, it was very black and white to me. You either had hit rock bottom or you were teetotal, but there was no other reason to stop drinking, and you were teetotal because of religious reasons or whatever. So the whole grey area drink. And then I found another one that was all about how being sober rocked. It was a great thing to do. And my perception changed a bit at that point. And so that was the start. And then another thing that happened, again, which makes me feel like I was being guided in a way, was I read an article about an alcohol-free fizz, and as I've said to you, I was the champagne queen. I loved champagne. That was the only thing I could drink at the end of, other than the day before I stopped drinking it, and I stopped drinking it. It was a nightmare, but that was my go-to thing. And I read about this alcohol-free version, and it was a journalist who was a real wine connoisseur, knew all the wines, really respected in her field. And she was reviewing this alcohol-free fizz. And I remember thinking, gosh, this sounds pretty cool. This sounds good. And then I thought, I've seen it before. I felt like I'd seen it and I knew it. And I was thinking, why does this feel familiar to me? And then I realized it was in my cupboard.
Oh, really?
And so you might think, well, how was it in your cupboard? What? Back up a minute. So yes, it was in my cupboard because that summer in the August, so I stopped in the November, in that August, someone had come to our house and brought this bottle with them. We were doing lunch or dinner. They brought the bottle with them. And I remember taking it from them, so, trying to be gracious. Thank you so much. But I looked at my husband and was like, why have you given me this bottle? Especially as the person proceeded to drink my wine, which was just rude, right?
Oh,
so
really?
I was sat with this alcohol-free bottle, and I was like, no,
did they know that it was an alcohol-free bottle that they were dropping off
I'm
at
sure
the Champagne Queen's house?
I'm sure. I have no idea. But I was offended. I was highly offended. And so I remember just stuffing it in the cupboard and not thinking anything about it. And then I thought, this bottle looks familiar. Went to my cupboard, and it was like it was waiting for me. It was at the back of the cupboard. I rummaged through, pulled this bottle out. And I remember thinking, well, that's a bit weird, a bit interesting. And I thought, I'll have a glass at a girls' night thing we were doing, because everyone was drinking. And I thought, well, if I pour this, everyone's going to think I'm drinking champagne, because that's what they know me for. And as I said, I hadn't told anyone. And so I opened this, poured a glass of it, expecting it to be vile, expecting it to just be awful. And I knew I had to put on my poker face and pretend that it was delicious, whatever, because, obviously when I have a drink, I'm like, oh, yes, and I'm all the fun and all the rest of it. And I had a sip and I was like, oh, this actually tastes quite good. And hold on a minute, if I can drink something that is an adult drink that tastes good, that doesn't make me feel like crap, that's actually really healthy for me because it's vegan, gluten free, no hardly any sugar, why would I then go back to alcohol?
Mm-hmm.
And that was my first epiphany. And since then, I've got into the whole alcohol free drinks. And I know this can trigger people, so I'm not saying everyone is able to do this or would want to do it. But for me, that was a game changer. And I've since gone on to be, this year I was a judge on the World Alcohol Free Awards. And so, I love the whole alcohol free drinks movement, the industry, and the way it's changed in 4 years. At the time, there were hardly any. And so this was one of the only good ones at the time. But that was, again, something that just shifted my thinking. And then I started hearing a podcast and hearing stories of people. I got quit lit. And so then that was when the journey of really getting into realizing that actually you can choose to not drink, and by being alcohol free, so many good things come out of it. I joined a community. I remember going on my first Zoom and there were people that maybe 3 months alcohol free, 6 months alcohol free, a year alcohol free, talking about how amazing it was and all the things that they were beginning to do. And I was just sat there going, what the hell? What you mean you can live without booze? What? It just was quite shocking to me. And so again, I mentioned earlier, I think we just don't question these things, or you don't see them, because you surround yourself with whoever you surround yourself with, and that's what you tend to know and hear. And it's all to do with, we can go into the subconscious mind and all of that, but really, we're not really conscious of a lot of the things we do. We run on 95% of ours, of the things we do is based on our subconscious. So only 5% is based on our conscious mind. And so a lot of the things we do are just automatic. They're just habit. And we rarely take that moment to pause and to say, is this something that's really serving me? Is this something that I want to continue doing? And question whether just because everyone else is doing it doesn't make it right. And so it was really beginning to open up my mind to a different way. And then I got into juicing, and then I got into yoga, and then I got into running. I've now run 2 marathons. I wasn't a runner up until 3 and a bit years ago. And so, life just sort of went from there. But I think the clarity, the awareness, the energy, the focus, and just being more present and taking in like everyday moments for me is probably been the highlight. It's not really about all the things that I've done. It's about me feeling a lot more calm, a lot more authentic, a lot internally. I think externally people would have said I was all those things, but internally me feeling like that, and really just feeling that joy, genuine joy, is something that I don't think I had. And really, knowing myself have been the key things for me over the past, 4 years or so.
I mean, it sounds like there's been so much that has happened in the last 4 years that potentially was just even unexpected. Upsides to this, this decision that you made, which I think is fantastic. I also, I certainly empathize with that. I have a question about, that oftentimes, folks in, whether you want to call it sobriety, recovery, living alcohol free, and certainly folks who come from the ideology of AA, there's this component of higher power. You clearly, was introduced this into your life by way of your church. But I hear that there were these many moments where you were, having a dialogue with yourself. There were coincidentally things that were popping up in your life, that maybe were a little unexplainable at the time. Where does this concept or reality for you of higher power rest within this broader journey of you stepping into this superpower that you found over the last 4.5 years?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So I would say that I grew up in sort of a church family. My mum would take us to church, and so God's always been there. But then I certainly went through a phase, probably 16 to 30, where I couldn't say I was really. I've always believed, I think, in something and believed in God, but I've never. There were times where I wasn't going to church. I wasn't really doing any of that. And then obviously, as I said, my brother, I don't know, I think from there, I felt like there must be more to life. There must be something bigger than, it can't be the end. He was 20, he was 7 years younger than me, and he's very young, he's 22. And I think when something like that happens to you, you do reflect on, this can't be it. This is, there must be more.
Yep.
And anyway, fast forward a few years, it got to the point where I was like, actually, this is my faith. I started having my own faith and believing in Jesus and God, and sort of just, that was something for me that I hadn't really had. I think I'd always had someone else's faith or whatever. And so I would say I had been very much building my faith over the years up until the time I stopped drinking. But since then, it's definitely got a lot stronger. And I do feel that actually, when you stop drinking, a lot of people talk about, manifestation and having clear intuition. And I definitely feel you have that channel, a clear channel to the divine, to something bigger than you, your higher power, when you don't drink, because you can actually hear, sort of, it's you can take things in, you can hear things, you get those intuitive voices, which they were probably always there, but you weren't hearing them. And so I would say I've got a lot stronger. And then I got baptized in 2012, and then in 2022, 10 years after I got baptized to the day, I ended up in hospital. And so I was at my fittest, wasn't drinking, hadn't been drinking for a while. I think I'd just done a half marathon. I was things were going really well. And I was poorly that week, and I just thought, I'm not feeling good. Something's not right. And I went to the doctors, and she looked at me and said, "You've got to go to hospital." And I panicked because I was like, "What's going on?" And I was taken to hospital. It was the day before my birthday, taken to hospital, and I ended up having a load of tests and all the rest of it. And cut a long story short, I was quite poorly for 5 months or so. Probably it was October time that I felt myself again. And in that time, I was in and out of hospital, lots of blood tests, I was on lots of medication, and they'd said to me, the likelihood is this is going to be a chronic illness, and you're going to be on medication all your life. You're going to be injecting yourself all your life, things like that.
What was if you don't mind sharing, what was the diagnosis? What did they discover? If you can share.
So basically, my platelets, which is your blood platelets, if they should be in their sort of hundreds, and mine went down to 9. So if I fell over, if I sort of knocked myself, I could have had internal bleeding, and It's a really rare thing. Not many people get it, but it's something that people live with, and they need to be constantly on medication and the rest of it. And so so it was all a really weird time, but for me, I had this real sense of peace, because at the beginning they didn't know what it was, and so it took a bit of time to diagnose what it was. But I had this sense of peace that actually, whatever happens, I'm going to be fine, and even if it does mean I'm on medication for the rest of my life, I'll still be fine. But at that point, that's when I did think, what do I really want to do with my life?
Mm.
What is this all about? Because I went through a bit of a dark stage during those first couple of months where I was really not feeling good. And I think the medication was obviously affecting me as well. And I was just finding myself hiding away from people and not talking to anyone. And it got a little bit lonely and depressing, I suppose, in a way. And I really felt my faith grow a lot in that time. And that's where one evening I was reading, because I just read a lot of books and just lay on the sofa and on the bed and whatnot, and I wasn't sleeping very well, so I'd be up at like 2, 3 in the morning reading or just trying to pass the time. And I had this download about Thrive Alcohol Free. And that was
Mm.
where the business came from and the company came from. And I had images of what it was about and what I was going to do. And I thought, but I'm in this corporate world. That's what I've been doing forever. And yeah, and then that's sort of what has led me to being where I am now. But it was a real, I've always had this, as I said, the past 12 years, I've had quite a good faith, I suppose. My own faith has grown, but definitely in the past 4 years, it's just completely, there's a real sense of calm with my, with God and with the divine and with me feeling that I'm looked after and everything happens
Mm.
for me as opposed to me.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. I really do appreciate it. So are you saying that Thrive Alcohol Free was, and you stepping into that was a leap of faith, or do you just were you kind of ushered into it by this extreme degree of like confidence coming from behind you? What did that
Oh, it's
transition look
definitely a
like for
leap of
you?
faith.
Okay.
It's always going to be a leap of faith. But I really had this sense that there was more and that actually there's something I still don't know what it's going to end up being. I don't know where I'm going to end up with it. And it is a leap of faith, absolutely. But it's made me really think that, and I think that's why I wrote my book, A Cocktail of Clarity, as well, because I felt like I needed to leave something, a legacy. It sounds morbid, but I think the thoughts that were going through my head at that point were, if I do, God forbid something happen, I'm not there in the next year, 2 years, what do I want to, what is it that I want? What do I want to do? What do I want to maybe leave behind? What legacy? It was really quite, it's all quite deep. I'm having this conversation with you. I think I haven't really shared this with anyone. But if, it was that real sense of there is more and I'm meant
Hmm.
to do a bit more. And although it's really comfortable staying where you are in the corporate world, I was pretty high up. I was doing pretty well.
Hmm.
This was tugging me a bit more. And so it was very much a transition. I was doing this alongside my corporate role for a long time. And it's only
Hmm.
been this year that I've really said, right, this is me going all in with Thrive. And yes, it's a leap of faith. It's a huge transition, but I think it's something that's needed, that I need to do, and we'll see where it goes.
Mm. I love that. It is deep subject matter. I've been, uh, and I don't know if this is part of the parcel of living trying to live a life of more clarity, but I have certainly been having my own inner dialogue around this subject of impermanence and legacy and
Mm.
contribution.
Yeah.
So I am curious, when you think about that, then, and you mentioned legacy. That's really a cornerstone word in my own conversation that I have with myself. Who's the audience to your legacy that you're working towards? Because I
Mm.
feel like at any moment this could go away, right? This
Mm.
experience that we have in life, and I'm a parent. I know that you're a parent.
Mm.
Um, a lot of what I do is driven by my children. I don't necessarily want to, put words in your mouth, but I am curious, when you start having these conversations with yourself about the contribution that you're making during the time that you have here, Like, who is the audience of that contribution, and how does that continue to fuel you?
Yeah. So certainly my family, my daughter, and I only have one. She's 10, as I said, and I feel like it's funny because she feels it's normal for me to have climbed Mount Kilimanjaro. She thinks it's normal that I've got a podcast. She thinks it's normal that I've written a book.
That's
That's her.
awesome.
That's her normal, right? Because that's
Yeah.
what she sees, and she thinks it's normal that I've run 2 marathons at the age of 42 and 43. It's not. It's just
Yeah.
her normal, and I think so many people, and it's not a criticism at all, but a lot of us want to live through our children. We want our children to. We want to say our children can do anything, they can be anything, but then actually we don't do anything or be anything, and I think I've always wanted to inspire her, and I've always
Mhm.
wanted her to feel she can do anything she wants to do. And so she's absolutely at the forefront of everything I do. But then I'm also really keen to empower other women,
Mhm.
mothers, corporate women, people who that don't, not necessarily mothers, but people that are in senior leadership roles, who may be thinking there's more to life, who may be thinking, I would love to do something for myself, but I can't because of X, Y, and Z reason that we've got in our heads. Who may be thinking, I'd love to try that, but I'm too old. Who may be thinking, this job is not fulfilling me, but it is paying me a hefty salary, and that's what I've always done, and
Yeah.
so I can't get away from that. Who may be just thinking, I've lost my passion. I don't know what my passion is anymore. And that hopefully give them the permission to try something different, to go after their dreams, and to take that leap, because the net does follow. But I know it's a tricky thing to do. So I'm really here to hopefully give people hope and encouragement, and hopefully inspire them as well to an extent, that it's never too late, that you can do whatever you want to do. And it's just a question of us getting our thoughts in the right place and giving ourselves a chance, and then taking it from there, because you're guided. You are here to do incredible things in the world, and anyone can do it. And it's just a question of believing that you can do something more and that there is more.
Yeah.
And that's it.
And it sounds like giving yourself the fighting chance, right?
Yeah.
To do it.
Yeah.
So we're going to close this up shortly here, but I do have one question that's been nagging me since I read this, and ultimately since you said it. Now, 4 years and a half later, what does the truth shall set you free mean? I know that maybe at the time it was probably a little bit challenging to decipher, and you had to take it at face value and take that leap of faith. But now that this is probably something that is echoed over and over and over again for you, what does that mean to you? What was the truth, and what were you ultimately being set free from?
Yeah. So I could say it was, the whole journey I've been on has been just unbelievable. But the real truth, I think, was in that November, in those 21 days, I had this conversation with someone in my workplace, a couple of people in my workplace, and it wasn't the best conversation in the world. And it got to the point where I was sat there thinking, I've been at this place for a long time, and I don't feel like I'm being valued. I'm not where I want to be, and I'm feeling like there's something that's not quite gelling. And normally, this sort of thing would happen, and I'd have a couple of drinks, And I'd put the world to rights, and I'd say, they don't value me. I'm going to go and do something different. I'm going to change. I'm going to make a change. And then invariably the next morning I'd wake up and be like, oh, well, I've been here for so long. They will eventually recognize me. I will be where I need to be, etc. And I'd forgive it, and I'd just stay where I was. And this time round, I woke up the next day, having not drunk, and thought, actually, I'm worth more. I need to do something about this now. And that for me was the truth, because I think for a long time I'd given excuse after excuse. I didn't believe in myself enough to think that if I'd been told I was in the best place, I was on the cusp of this and on the cusp of that. And why would you possibly work anywhere else? And I realized that that wasn't true, that there are lots of other organizations out there, that there are lots of other opportunities out there. And for the first time in a long time at that point, I bet on myself, and I said, I'm going to have some conversations with people. And I ended up having quite a few people actually in my network reach out to me and say, you need to talk to so-and-so, you need to talk to so-and-so. And I had lots of really good conversations, but it eventually led to me getting headhunted for a role where I was pretty much, it over doubled my salary. And I was earning a fair amount at the time. So to then double my salary and to get, this massive role. And it was just incredible. That was for me one point of me seeing the truth would set me free. And then at the same time, in parallel to this, obviously didn't know that was all coming. But at the end of that month, end of December, I decided I wanted to do a coaching qualification. And so I said, this is something I really wanted to do. I'd done lots of coaching courses at the time for my work, over the time for my work, but never qualified as a coach. And I thought, I'm going to do that. And I'm going to make, again, just a decision. I don't know where it's going to lead. I don't know what I'm going to do with it. So I was doing this coaching qualification in parallel to having these conversations, not knowing where that was going to lead. And both those things, I think, have helped me get to a point where I really valued myself. I really felt like this is my worth. But at the same time, I started doing something that I really loved as well, and realized that coaching was something that I did truly love. And so it was the best of both worlds, really, until I had to make a decision. And so, but I think that was my truth, the truth setting me free. The truth was that, and it's something I want other people to hear, and whoever's listening to hear, that you are worth so much more than you maybe are giving yourself credit for. You have a lot of skills, you have a lot of talent, and we all hold ourselves back because we either think we're getting old, or this is it, this is our lot, or I couldn't possibly do something different because I've got XYZ responsibility. But you can change your life completely. And that was the start. So, yeah.
I love it. Thank you for sharing that. And I think it segues really nicely into, my last question, for someone who's sitting there and, may not necessarily have hit any quote unquote rock bottom, but they're taking a hard look at their relationship with alcohol. And they're saying, I want to do some things differently here to step into this space that Ray and Dupe are talking about right now. But they don't know the first step to take. What would you suggest to that person?
Know your why. Why do you want to do it? What's the reason? And then from a practical perspective, give yourself a little challenge and look at it as an experiment. Say, I'm going to do a 21-day break, I'm going to do a 31-day break, and treat it as an experiment. See what it's like. Don't put too much pressure on yourself. And on days when you want to reach for a drink, I always say this to people: before you reach for that drink, take a pause and think, halt. And that means, am I hungry? Am I angry? Am I lonely? Am I tired? And depending on, or am I fearful? That's a bonus. And depending on what you say to that, think about what you can do instead. So instead of reaching for that drink, pause, think, halt. What can I do? If I'm hungry, I'm going to eat something. And after I've eaten something, do I still want the drink? If I'm angry, what can I do? Do I want to punch a pillow? Do I want to shout? Do I want to whatever? Do that. Come back. Do I want that drink? If I'm lonely, call a friend. If I'm tired, have a nap and then decide. If I'm fearful, think, oh, what am I frightened of? And is it true? And then go back and think, do I need that drink? And the likelihood is you probably won't. And I always think going for a walk is always a really good thing for all of those things. If you want to, go for a walk and come back and see if you need that drink. So they would be the things that I would say would be helpful to get started.
I love that pause. I'm definitely going to call that out specifically. I think tools are so key when you're just trying to, get your footing and step in a new direction. Dupe, where can folks find your work, your book, your podcast, all of these beautiful things that you've been working on over the last several years?
Thank you. So you can find me on Instagram at Thrive Alcohol Free. My podcast is Thrive Alcohol Free. My website is thrivealcoholfree.com. And my book is A Cocktail of Clarity, and you can get that anywhere you get on Amazon and Kindle and paperback form. And just reach out. And I'm on LinkedIn, Dupe Witherick. You can also find me there if you're a LinkedIn person. I'm there as well.
Thank you so much. If there's any confusion, Dupe is certainly thriving alcohol free. So please take the opportunity, go seek her out, check her out. She's certainly a beacon of inspiration and hope and knowledge, frankly. So I'm so happy that we were able to do this. Thank you. I know it's a little bit later in your day, but I really do appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you, Ray. It's been a pleasure. And as I said, I love what you're doing. And so keep going. It's fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you. Everyone, we'll be back next time, same bat channel, same bat place for another episode of Stacking Days. And until then, be well, one day at a time. Peace.
I appreciate you guys listening to the Stacking Days podcast. I hope this episode added value to your recovery and wellness journey. Before we go our separate ways, let's connect on social. You can find us on TikTok and Instagram at Stacking Days or via the website www.stackingdays.com. By supporting the show, you can play a direct role in amplifying people of color in their pursuit of recovery. The easiest way to do that is to subscribe or hit the follow button. This way, you'll never miss an episode, all while playing an active part in creating the ecosystem where diverse voices and healing matter. This show is for the purpose of education and connection and is not a replacement for therapy or recovery care. For more information on the resources and support available, take a look at SAMHSA and some other resources shared in the description. Until we meet again, be well, one day at a time.